I'm going to talk about Maya Lin. She is an architect, she is a sculptor, an artist, and she's known as a memorial designer, but she doesn't only want to be remembered as a memorial designer. She is most famous for her work on the Vietnam Memorial. So Yale student, academic parents. She is represented by the Pace Gallery, so she's a successful artist. And she entered a contest to find the best design for the Vietnam Veteran Memorial. And there were a ton of entries, well over 1,000. And there were some pretty emotional hearings when some Vietnam veterans decided they were offended because she was an Asian artist. Now, mind you, she's an Asian American artist. She's born in Athens, Ohio, 1959. Her parents were immigrants from China, faculty members at Ohio University. Father, a ceramicist and dean of the School of Art, mother, a poet and retired literature professor, and again, she comes from this very artistic family, and certainly I think that didn't hurt her to win this opportunity to present a winning plan for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And it's kind of ironic that it did cause such an upset. You know, this young woman was born and raised in the United States. She is an American. And anyway, race certainly came into question with this conflict. So there were more than 1,400 entries. This is a picture of her as a young woman. And the memorial is 594 feet. It's granite, and it has the names of more than 58,000 soldiers who died during the war. On the second image is her plans that were submitted. The aesthetic was very, very clean, very, very simple, very contemporary, really certain degree minimalistic, very, very stark. Most people today think it's extremely powerful and they admire it a great deal. People ask, if you'd never won the war award, where would you be? She says, I would probably be making things, I think, with my hands. So even so, she thinks that she would have become an artist. I almost think it's not a doubt just because of her background and her interest. But she has been very, very successful in art. She's often a speaker. There's numerous talks on her on YouTube. So the main flack came after the Washington Post had a great headline: an Asian memorial for an Asian war. And in any case, this really perturbed some people. And so there was quite an ordeal about it. A lot of people were upset. So Ross Perot, there's a familiar name for you, was her most prominent opponent. The tycoon and future candidate for president put up $160,000. This was a long time ago, so that's a pretty big number to help fund the design competition, but he dismissed the winning design as something for New York intellectuals. Lin later told the New Yorker that Perot even visited her office and asked, "Don't you think they just need a parade?" Lin responded, "Well, they really need more than a parade." Her design was called a black trench that scars the mall. It was called a black scar and a degrading ditch. The New Republic said the way the memorial listed the names of the dead makes them individual deaths, not deaths in a cause. They might as well have been in a traffic accident. And I think it's quite the reverse. What she chose to do is to name the deaths chronologically. For instance, if your name was Smith and you died, she did not want an alphabetized list, just kind of listed there with hundreds of other Smiths. She wanted there to be some individuality. So she chose to list the names chronologically and by date. And there's a computer there that helps people locate their loved one. People are often seen there with a piece of paper and some sort of crayon or pencil or drawing implement, making an impression of their loved one's name. The other thing I like about it is that as you're looking at it, you're also reflecting back at it. So a viewer also becomes a participant in the art, and I think that's interesting in this particular memorial. And the black color is somber as well. I think the design was extremely simple, remarkable that she got picked, and but I think it's the right memorial. But at the time, a lot of people did not. She said, I had a simple impulse to cut into the earth. I imagined taking a knife and cutting into it, opening it up, and the initial violence and pain that in time would heal. The grass would grow back, but the initial cut would remain a pure flat surface in the earth with a polished, mirrored surface, much like the surface on a geode when you cut it and polish the edge. So very articulate. But again, initially the design was not appreciated, generally speaking. But today I think quite the opposite is true. And I think it's timeless. I think that's one thing about it that I appreciate. It's a timeless memorial. Over 4 million people visit the Vietnam War Memorial each year, probably even more, frankly. It was built with funds for the private sector. I'll show you examples of it, and you can see it in different lights, different times of year. And she also wrote a children's book about it as well. They read into it that it's a V for victory. It's really not that. And they read into the image that the image was the color black as being negative. It's not. Again, I think it's somber. I think it's reflective. But I think it's a powerful memorial. And that quelled it politically, but didn't quell it in the fracas that was happening outside of the subcommittee in the government. You had to get through the process. To get the memorial built, you had to go through 5 committees 2 or 3 times. We're talking a lot of bureaucracy. Maya Lin, interviewed by Bill Moyer. So here we see some examples. And this is a more traditional work by Frederick Hart. And this is actually in the same area as the other one. But again, I think there's place for different types of art. This is great that it's different. So Ross Perot was widely reported to call her an egg roll during the prolonged controversy that preceded the memorial's dedication in 1982. As part of a compromise, a more conventional statue, the 3 soldiers, was added in 1984. And so in any case, this was what a lot of people perceived as more of a heroic example of for the Vietnam War Memorial. But the problem with this, I think, is it doesn't recognize every single individual, which hers does. So in any case, it was an ordeal. That's an understatement. I'll include some clips about it. And it ended up going up. Black granite set below grade, connected to at a 125-degree angle, and there's over 58,000 names on it. And it also include names of the missing and the dead. So Almost as soon as the design was publicized, it was opposed. And because it was a sensitive topic, I think that almost anything would have been opposed, but this really seemed to strike a nerve with some people. But in any case, a number of people were extremely vociferous about their objections, and they referred to it as a black ditch, a black gash of shame, a scar, all different types of epithets. But again, I think it's quite powerful. But I think it's kind of reasonable that they put up a more traditional example in the same area as well. And why not? The three men represented are Caucasian, African American, and there's a Latino soldier as well. And so this was very, very specific. I think it's kind of notable that they didn't choose to have an Asian American there, but again, that was part of the problem. So it stands alone, very much apart from the wall, but again, it's in the same general area. So her work did prevail, which I think is good and powerful, and differences of opinion on the aesthetics and everything else were eventually resolved. But it was very much fought against. Now here you can see an aerial view of it. Again, it's hugely popular today. The definition of a modern approach to war is the acknowledgement of individual lives lost. She's very articulate. You'll see that when you hear her speak. Her voice is very, very calm. She was very well collected, especially for a young woman when she was going through all of this. She was pretty devastated by it. It was very upsetting for her. She said, I wanted to create a memorial that would be able to respond to, everyone would be able to respond to, regardless of whether one thought our country should or should not have participated in the war, which of course is still a question today. And a lot of people still are very much debate about the Vietnam War. So controversial then, somewhat controversial now, but certainly I think it's important that it's remembered. Ho Chi Minh took power in the north, while Emperor Bao Dai for a while ruled in the south. Communist trained South Vietnamese were known as the Viet Cong. The Viet Cong struggled against the South Vietnamese. In the mid-1960s, North Vietnam initiated a full-fledged war. China and the Soviet Union provided military equipment, but not manpower, to the North Vietnamese. The U.S. supported non-communist South Vietnam. By 1969, there were more than 500,000 troops in South Vietnam, and people were not happy. And this was a war that was largely played on television, and I think that also added to it. People were very emotionally vested in it. And too, it was fairly complicated. Still complicated. Resist the draft, don't register, refuse to torture and kill. Already too many have died, and so the protests were really powerful. U.S. troops left in 1973. More fighting broke out after the U.S. troops left. South Vietnam surrendered to North Vietnam. The North Vietnamese called the conflict a war of national liberation. They also perceived the war as a threat to their ultimate independence. U.S. involved because of the threat of communism. And so I'm sure there's different views, but again, I tried to find the most condensed view of it. I know it's a large topic, and I tried to simplify it a bit, and please forgive me for that. In an interview, she said, I actually think Vietnam veterans reading in the paper that this is an Asian memorial for an Asian war, it wasn't even about racism. It was like, this is hard for them to swallow. I had no idea there was a problem with my race. I was so naive that I remember at the very first press conference, some reporter said, don't you think it's ironic that the memorial is the Vietnam memorial and you're of Asian descent? And I looked at him and I was like, well, that's irrelevant. You know, this is American. Your gender didn't matter. Your age didn't matter. Your race didn't matter. So I actually was so happily naive, I didn't realize that people would have a problem with me. And sadly, they did. So some of the images you find online are particularly poignant. This is one of them. Lynn today is one of the nation's foremost public space artists. And she's designed furniture, architecture for American Express. She's done a lot of work at UCI. Some of her work is truly inspired. Rosa Parks Circle, Grand Rapids, Michigan. I saw a video on this a long time ago. I think I still have the DVD, but I'm not easily to really play for you. And she designed this this park in Grand Rapids, and though it featured a water feature, which also included a skating park, and it's really quite remarkable. And it included an amphitheater. She worked with lighting people to, basically make it look like stars at night. These pictures don't do it justice. Here's a model for the skating rink. Her work tends to be pretty austere. And in 2020, it was undergoing restoration work. So, but the effect of it at night is rather magical. She's also done earthworks. Land art is also something that's part of contemporary art. And land art is also something she's participated, large-scale land art. Of course, Vietnam War veteran memorial is pretty large scale. So these are a series of earthwork installations. This particular one looks like almost like some sort of a snake going across the land. And so she was basically interested in the idea of line. Why one line can look modern, another historical. With each drawing, she was fascinated by how much a single mark can be so expressive. In general, when you have curvilinear forms, they tend to look more creative. When you have more angular forms, they tend to look more analytical. It's very much true. But in any case, she was experimenting with this idea of line. And this is called the 11-minute line at Wanäs Castle in Sweden. And she also has this interest in prehistoric forms linking US to Europe. And this was inspired by Ohio's Serpent Mound that was dated from the 11th century in Peebles, Ohio. Of course, she's from Ohio. In southeastern Ohio, there exist many burial and effigy mounds from the Hopewell and Adena tribes between 1000 before Common Era and 700 AD. One of the most striking is a mound in the shape of a snake, the Serpent Mound. And so that indeed was what she was trying to emulate. Kentucky line, 2008, earth drawing number 2. Private residence, Louisville, Kentucky, 177 by 115 feet and 6 feet tall. So the only view you'd really have of it is if you're above it looking down. The Wave Field, 1995, Francois Xavier Bagnot Aerospace Engineering Building. University of Michigan. And so this is 105 feet by 80 feet by 3 feet tall. So she's produces monumental land art. So this sculpture is an expression of a simple water wave, taking its inspiration from fluid dynamics, aerodynamics, and turbulence, or waves. Picture it like the ocean, but it's certainly more exact. Storm King wave field. And so here you can see an example of these waves that looks kind of haunting with the fog in it as well. So she also does a lot of contemporary sculpture, and this is some of it, but again, often large scale. Above and below, and this is from a University of Washington exhibition, so you can see her work with wire. But again, it has this real analytical quality to it. I think she has a very analytical aspect to her work. So this is from her exhibition, A River is a Drawing. And so you can actually see installation work by Maya Lin here. So I think her work is interesting. It's sometimes a little sterile, but I still think it's interesting. So again, this is the installation, A River is a Drawing. She says, I see rivers as fluid, moving drawings, delineated and drawn out. From the bamboo garden stakes which created drawing you physically interact with, to an interior flood of marbles of the same river, to the smaller mapping of the entire Hudson River watershed. Each one is a unique drawing and shows a different way in which the body will interact with the form. These are her words. She received the 2006 Presidential Medal of Freedom for her contributions. And again, she continues to be a very successful artist. This is kind of a form that recurs in her work. I mean, if you indeed Google Maya Lin, you're going to come up with a lot of soft curves, lots of angular lines, very, very, very analytical. Much more than I would say, per se, artistic. I think there is definitely an architectural feature to her work. As I walked on it for the first time, she says, all I could think of was, wow, I'd really like to push this, to make this curve, this heel, something extremely tall so you could actually get to a different relationship to the ceiling. When she returned to her studio, she pushed it, and the result is a 2x4 landscape, an imposing hill made of thousands of upright 2x4s that's currently being assembled in a warehouse in South Lake Union. So, well, obviously she's not doing all this work herself. She does have people that help her create these works, but she certainly conceptualizes them. And so she wanted to explore how we experience landscape and technical influences. And environmental change are things that interest her as well. But again, her work is interesting. So this requires no less than 2,800 square feet of uninterrupted space, composed of nearly 70,000 boards. So this cannot be shown just anywhere. And so, because again, it is large. So. Systematic Landscapes, exhibition image, 2007. In art or architecture, your project is only done when you say it's done. I think this is one of the hardest things about art, is to step away and say, okay, it's done. I've got to stop fussing with it. Exhibit A is behind me because it's been there a while and I do need to finish it. If you want to rip it apart at the 11th hour and start all over again, you never finish. And you need to stop doing that. I was one of those crazy creatures, as was I. So here you see a kind of a cross-section of some of her work. And I think it's very appealing to a lot of people. It's very, very spare, simplified forms, very, very organic. You can kind of see that she's very interested in nature.